Right. Yeah, really to begin with, Sella asked me to give a little bit of my personal story. She already explained a little bit, but also just to give you a little bit of a story of how did I end up doing what I'm doing now. And it's been a kind of journey. Like Stella mentioned, I started as a research scientist in public health. So I was working in a laboratory mostly in United Kingdom in a public health research institute. And during that time, I got training to dealing with dangerous pathogens. We were doing vaccine research into things like anthrax and smallpox at the time, vaccines that are now used for mpox epidemic that is happening. And because of that training, I got then sort of back in 2014, I got sent to West Africa. There was a big Ebola epidemic happening in several countries in West Africa in 2014 to 2016, and with this training that I had of handling and doing diagnostics with these dangerous pathogens, I got sent over to run these field laboratories in Guinea and Sierra Leone mainly. And I spent several months there, and I really, really enjoyed this work. I felt like I really had found my thing, and I enjoyed being in a field and kept going back. And really during this time, I then decided that I will not go back to the research laboratory in the UK. And I had always been a conservationist, really at heart, since I was very small. That was my sort of personal interest. And I thought, okay, this is my opportunity also to jump completely from one area to another and go into conservation. And I was very lucky. I found a great ape conservation project in Central African Republic, and they were looking for someone to run diagnostics and their field laboratory in Central Africa for same diseases that I had been looking at in humans. So Ebola's, a lot of respiratory diseases, things that we get infected as well, so zoonotic diseases. So I could offer this skill to them, so I was in, and I moved to Central Africa. And during this time, I worked a lot with the vets that were in the field. And I always found them very inspiring people. I respected their work a lot and found it very interesting. I was assisting in snare removals. We're taking a snare here on the bottom left corner picture. We're taking a snare from a female gorilla. I was doing a lot of necropsies with the vets, as well as then running the lab, the field laboratory. But it was these little guys that really made me finally become a vet. So just as I was joining the project in Central Africa, there was a big problem with poaching of African grey parrots. So they were caught in the wild and sold and exported to pets, mostly outside Africa. And really, kind of in these first few months that I was there, we received so many of these. We landed with over 1,000 of these parrots in our hands in a space of just a couple of months. And their flight feathers had been cut so that they can't escape. They were stressed, they were sick, and just generally in a really bad shape. And despite our best efforts, they just kept dying, and we couldn't release them because they couldn't fly. And this is where I kind of really realized how valuable these hands-on skills, practical hands-on skills are really. And that decision, this is one of the pictures of one of those confiscations that we had. And that really kind of made me decide that I'm going to be enjoying this work in the field in the future, so I'm going to become a vet. And so I did. So I joined a vet school in London, and during this time I carried on working in Congo in these projects that I was already involved. So that is now closer to 8 years that I've been involved with the project in Congo. So that's my story. A good example is never too late to follow your dreams. I like to then use the rest of the time telling you about a couple of activities that I've been working with during my time in these conservation projects, now as a vet, previously as a scientist, now as a vet. But this is really kind of projects that are combining both my previous skills as well as some of the veterinary skills now. And really just to give you an idea of vets, there are many of us, that's why I'm talking in plural. So there's many of us working on One Health. And really kind of around zoonotic diseases, so diseases that are transmitted between animals and humans, and really kind of with the focus in wildlife. So just to start with, just a recap of the One Health concept. I don't know if you're aware of it or familiar with it, but it's really it's kind of integrated and unifying approach that aims to balance the health of people and animals and ecosystems. So we're kind of all part of the same system, and our health cannot be considered isolated from each other. So really kind of understanding that everything's interlinked. And when we think of problems and solutions, we need to think of all components of the planet and everything that's living in it. And the zoonoses are really part of this. We share diseases between animals and humans, and conservation is really at the heart of it, actually, everything, all of it, because it is about sustainable wildlife population and sustainable environment and healthy environment. So that's why it's all connected. And vets, we are important in that equation. So the first project that I would like to introduce is this community-based wildlife mortality surveillance for detecting Ebola outbreaks in the wild animals in the forest. So this is really quite a nice example of project that has a conservation as well as public health objective right at the heart of it. And I need to give you just a little bit of background for this. So back in the history, these purple dots here are all Ebola outbreaks that have happened in human population. And this has been kind of happening throughout last 30, 40 years. And a lot of these have started in quite isolated communities in the forest and have been linked back to people eating wildlife that's been found dead in the forest. So these are human outbreaks. But at the same time, there was also a lot of great ape, so gorilla and chimpanzee deaths happening in the forest in these areas. And that was quite a big deal for great apes, especially. In some areas, almost complete populations were wiped out of gorillas due to this epidemic within a matter of just weeks. And that disease epidemic really kind of raised Ebola specifically, but infectious diseases right at the top of the threats that are threatening gorillas, along with poaching and habitat loss. And this is kind of something that, for example, we are seeing right now with avian influenza. So that's really kind of a transmissible disease epidemic that has potential to really wipe out entire species in cases where there already are other threats posing these animals. So this was a really good example where disease was very at the heart of conservation efforts and a big threat to a species. So really what was happening, both humans and great apes were dying in these forested areas, in the small communities. And what we kind of needed to then start looking is that how can we detect these outbreaks in the gorilla populations, and to try, and as well as human population, and try to kind of stop the further spread of the disease. But these diseases and these outbreaks, especially in a kind of animal population, are really hard to detect. So it's a very dense forest. Any animal carcasses don't last very long. They decompose very quickly. So doing any surveillance for animals and dead animals is quite difficult, and the areas are vast. So really to gain the information of these possible mortalities that are happening in the forest, in the wildlife, we were thinking what to do, and we decided to turn to the people who are already in the forest. So these hunters who live in these communities. So what our vet team did is started going in a car around these remote areas and communities, hunter communities all over the northern Congo. And we explain to the communities about the risks that are associated with eating animals that are found dead in the forest. So we explain them about viral disease and that there are viruses that we share between animals and that they can be very dangerous and that there's a possible danger associated with eating the dead animals. And at the same time, we're asking that if they saw any dead animals in the forest, that they would let us know about it, and especially gorillas. So they let us know. And they did. So every time the hunters were finding dead animals, they would let us know. We'd dispatch a team in safe clothing and sampling gear and send them to collect a sample, diagnostic sample from those carcasses. Now, these carcasses have potentially got deadly diseases them, so we had to use a very strict, protocol, very strict way of using our protective gear, the PPE, and very strict way of collecting the samples to make sure that we're not contaminating ourselves or others in this process, and that we get a good sample. And then we test these samples. We actually have a way of testing some of these samples in the forest now, or we send them to a lab to be tested for the presence of Ebola virus. And then when we get a result, up until now, since those Ebola epidemics that were happening, we haven't luckily had any positive samples. But what we do is we share the results regardless with the community and continue this education process that is happening. And really kind of as well as being kind of this sort of early warning system for a potential outbreak that is happening, that is also endangering human lives. We're also kind of encouraging a behavioral change. So it's kind of, it has a potential of stopping people or that epidemic even starting because people are educated about the danger. So in the first place, they don't go and eat and collect the carcass meat at all. And ideally, this would also give us some strategies for protecting gorillas and other wildlife if there is an outbreak happening. And really, with this kind of system, this kind of community-based surveillance system, we've really managed to reach a lot of people and cover a lot of ground. So we have visited over 300 villages in this area. All these little green dots are villages. And I think we're to about 15,000 hunters and women and children who live in these communities at the moment. So we really cover quite a big area of land where these hunters do go around. Right, time is pushing. So I've got a second project for you. And I'm not sure how much I've got time to tell you about this, but if I'm running out of time and if you find this interesting, then I'm going to be talking about this a bit more elaborately and a bit more length tomorrow. And the share screen team can give you details of how to find that. But the second project I wanted to talk about is a research study, specific research study. And this is another One Health project example that has both conservation and public health objectives. So these fruit bats are very widely consumed as food in the whole of African continent and in Republic of Congo. And they provide a very important income source for people, and they're also a very important protein source for people who are eating them. And by far the most commonly eaten and hunted bat is the straw-colored food bat, Eidolon. And this is an incredibly important species ecologically in Africa. They are seed dispersers, they pollinate trees, and they recycle nutrients in the ecosystem. And they really are these gardeners of Africa. Some of the biggest mammal migrations are when these bats are flying around, and you may have seen them. But these are incredibly important species for the health of the planet and health of Africa. But they are also known to harbor viruses. So bats have got this kind of capability of carrying viruses and not becoming sick themselves. And this species has been associated with many kind of diseases through both molecular studies and serological studies. And these are diseases that do have capacity to make people very sick. So we really started to then kind of look at this bat trade and think that this bat hunting and handling bats brings humans and into very close contact with the bats, obviously. and that creates opportunities for these bats that are for the viruses that are in these bats to spill over into the human population and potentially cause disease. So then we kind of launched a study to start looking into what is the risk. We wanted to know what is the risk associated in this trade. So we took 2 different towns in Congo, Wesso and Brazzaville. Brazzaville is the capital, and in both of these towns there is a vibrant bat trade going on. And we went and sampled a lot of bats, 453 bats went through our hands, and we took swab samples and blood samples from them. And we also took some blood samples from the hunters and people who are selling the bats. And then we started to look at viruses. What can we find in them? And the first thing we looked at was coronaviruses. So everybody knows now COVID virus. So this is very interesting. Bats harbor a lot of coronaviruses, and we found a lot of them. So that's where I'm highlighting kind of that in 52% of the bats, so over half of the bats had coronavirus infection going on. And 5 of the bats, so not very much, but 5 of the bats had an active infection with a family of paramyxoviruses. We can talk about this later if you've got questions, and I don't know how much you know about viruses, but these are both kind of families of viruses that can infect humans. And then what we specifically found is that we had a lot more bats in Brazzaville that were infected with these coronaviruses than in Wesso. So Brazzaville is a capital city and very vibrant place for the market. So we found this quite interesting. And then when we started to look at what kind of coronaviruses are these, so we did some sequencing studies. So really look into detail what kind of viruses they are. And we found that these viruses that we had in our bats are very close to these known bat coronaviruses called Eidolon beta coronaviruses. And up until this point, they have not been associated with human infections, but coronaviruses are very good at mutating. So almost every species, mammalian species, have some kind of coronavirus in them. So they mutate very easily and they jump species very easily. So we need to keep a look at these. And they are kind of quite closely related to other coronaviruses, such as SARS-CoV-2, so COVID-19 causative virus. Ooh, I'm really pushing time. Can I still go on to the serology? Do I still have a few minutes? Yeah. So then we also wanted to have a look at past infections that these bats have. So active viruses and active infection is a really short period of time in bats. So we have to be very lucky actually to catch these viruses sometimes. But with antibodies, they kind of leave this kind of like a memory into our immune system. So we can look at antibodies and say, okay, this virus has been infected sometime in the past with this kind of virus. So we really screened all these viruses, all these bats and their serum for different kind of antibodies that are raised for different viruses. And what we found is that there was quite a lot past infections happening in these bats. So for example, here, I probably shouldn't talk. Actually, I'm going to, just in the interest of time, skip through these couple of slides a bit and jump straight into our comparative slide. So here on the left, I've got an example of antibodies that we found in the bats, and here on the right, I've got examples of antibodies that we found in the hunters. And here, what is kind of important is that we found antibodies in both bats and humans against these Ebola viruses and Bundibugyo viruses. So that indicates that both bats and humans had a previous infection with this. And that also means that there could be some infection going between. So the bats might be infecting humans with these Ebola viruses. And we found a similar thing with this paramyxovirus, a different virus family, with this virus called Mojang here. So again, on the left, bats, and on the right, humans. And again, there could be a transfer of viruses going on between the humans and bats. However, there's also this Ghana virus that we can see on the left in bats, but no infections and no antibodies in humans. So this just kind of gives you an idea that there's a lot of further questions that often comes with these research studies, and this is an ongoing project, so we still keep looking into this and trying to understand more what is happening. But what we're definitely seeing is that there is potentially happening this transfer, and that could be a risk happening in this bat trade. Okay, I've really gone long. So then this is an empty slide. It's just kind of for all of you to kind of encourage your reflections on roles that vets have in conservation and One Health. And I think really the last thing I just wanted to say, when I remember we were kind of really thinking about this with Sela, and you all becoming vets, or you're studying becoming vets, and that is kind of the status that you have, and something that you can share. So you can share information, and I think that is possibly one of the most important aspects of being a vet. People will listen to you, and you can always educate. So be educators and be inspirers, and be people who are approachable to be asked questions, and that is a very simplest way that you can be conservationists and you can be vets. So there we go. That was my speed talk. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eva. This was a very interesting talk. Like, one thing that I've gotten, one message that I've gotten from here is you can always be what you want. Like for you changed, like when you're already doing something, but you said, no, I want to be a vet, and you went for it. So for the students, if you were like, you wanted something else, but today you want to be a water vet, it's not too late. Even when you're in fourth year, you go for it. Yeah. And also another thing, it's like very interesting to see. Now we're moving on to our second speaker. If you have questions for Dr. Eva, please type them in the chats. And at the end, she will reply to the questions. Dr. Bridget, you can now share your screen, and please welcome.
Good evening, everyone. And Sela, thank you for the warm introduction. My name is Bridget Nyalila, and I am a wildlife veterinarian based in Malawi. Today, I am excited to share my journey in wildlife medicine and conservation, highlighting the work that we do to protect Malawi's wildlife. Let me just briefly introduce myself. I am a wildlife veterinarian. I am currently working at Lilongwe Wildlife Trust. I hold a bachelor's degree in veterinary medicine from Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. I graduated in 2023, which is last year. So it's been exactly 1 year of me practicing. So how did I find myself working in wildlife? During my time as a student, I was very curious about the possibilities within veterinary medicine. Um, in Malawi, opportunities in this field were not and are still not as pronounced as probably most of the countries. But that only fueled my curiosity, and I made it a point to volunteer every holiday, taking every opportunity to learn and to gain hands-on experience. So I started volunteering with the Blantyre SPCA, where I gained valuable clinical skills. Later, I volunteered at Majete Wildlife Reserve, where I worked with worldwide veterinary services. Here is where I learned more on wildlife work. It is during my time at Majete Wildlife Reserve that I discovered my passion in wildlife. That experience opened doors for me to connect to professionals working in wildlife private practice. And eventually I traveled to South Africa with the Loop Abroad program, where I expanded my knowledge in zoo medicine and wildlife rehabilitation. Later on, I joined the Long Wildlife Trust. So I think these experiences led me to where I am right now. It's been an exciting journey, and it's full of learning and growth. So a little bit about Lilong Wildlife Trust. So Lilong Wildlife Trust, commonly known as LWT, is one of Malawi's leading conservation organizations, located in the capital city of Malawi, which is Lilongwe. It serves as the country's first response to wild animals that are injured, orphaned, or rescued from illegal wildlife trade. LWT is a multidisciplinary organization with 5 key departments, each playing a crucial role in wildlife conservation. So the five departments are biodiversity research, environmental education, conservation justice, campaigning and advocacy, and wildlife rescue and warfare. I specifically work in the Wildlife Rescue and Warfare Department, where we focus on rescuing, rehabilitating, and providing veterinary care to wild animals with the goal of releasing them back into the wild whenever possible. So, what are my roles at Lilong Wildlife Trust? I work alongside a dedicated team of vets, wildlife vets. I'm not alone. I have two seniors, Dr. Laston and Dr. Julia, um, providing veterinary care to both resident and rescued animals. So my role involves treating patients that arrive, prescribe medicine according to their conditions, monitoring the disease up until the animal is healthy enough, while making sure that we're doing minimally invasive techniques, as these are wildlife species and would like to release them back into the wild, and we would like to minimize stress to these animals. Some of the common cases that we have are treating injured animals that are hit by vehicles, that are electrocuted, that are burnt in farms where people are clearing the farms by burning. So some wild animals are burned during that process, or injured during human wildlife conflict. Another vital aspect of my law involves mentoring and training both national and international veterinary students who come to volunteer with us. These veterinary externs assist with daily operations and gain hands-on experience in wildlife medicine, contributing to their development as future wildlife professionals while supporting our efforts in wildlife rescue and rehabilitation. At Long Wildlife Trust, we work with a variety of species, which include primates, carnivores, birds, reptiles, antelopes, elephants, pangolins, hedgehogs, only to mention a few. Um, so, what are the roles of a wildlife veterinarian? What are the contributions a wildlife veterinarian is making to conservation, to the country, or to the world? One of the contribution is preserving biodiversity. So when we are protecting the endemic species, for example, the species here in Malawi, um, Malawi is home to unique species, so conserving them ensures the survival of these animals for future generations. And by preserving a wide range of species, we maintain genetic diversity. We also contribute to the balance of the ecosystem. So promoting predators like lions and herbivores like antelopes helps sustain the natural predator-prey relationship, preventing overpopulation or extinction of species. Some species like birds, birds, and even some mammals contribute to pollination and seed dispersal, which is essential for the regeneration of Malawi's forests and other natural environments. And as veterinarians, we also contribute to public health. So controlling zoonotic diseases. So by protecting wildlife and their natural habitat, conservation efforts help limit the interaction between wildlife and humans, reducing the risk of zoonotic diseases like Ebola, SARS, as Eva mentioned, and COVID-19, which originate from animal populations. And we also contribute to dualism and economy. So Malawi's national parks and wildlife reserve are a major attraction to tourists. So by conserving wildlife, the country attracts tourists, generating revenue that supports the local economy. Some of my successes, some of the successes that I've had, I have successfully made it as the first female Malawian wildlife veterinarian. I and my team have successfully rescued animals as well as effectively rehabilitate animals. On the picture above is a case of an owl named LP. Most people here in Malawi, in this region, believe that owls are a bad omen, that they bring death. So LP was a victim whereby he was stoned to death, to die, sorry. Fortunately, he was rescued and brought to our center where we treated him for head trauma. He had damage to his eye, which eventually required enucleation. Initially unable to self-feed, we hand-fed him for several weeks until he recovered. Today, he's thriving at the center, happily interacting with his companion, Sporty, right behind him there. So I and my team have also rehabilitation, which has led to successful releases of a lot of animals to their natural habitats. I have also successfully mentored and trained veterinary students and volunteers, sharing my knowledge and skills of wildlife medicine, which I have gained so far, which helps build the capacity in the field. There are a few challenges that I made on my journey to reach where I am right now. For example, limited resources. During my study, there were minimal clinics available for hands-on experience, and the clinics only allowed a few number of students at a time, which made it difficult to gain practical skills. Also, there are few resources dedicated to veterinary care, such as laboratories. So this just limit our capacity, as well as limited wildlife medicine coverage. For me, as I wanted to work on wildlife, there were and still are very few wildlife veterinarians and organizations working specifically on wildlife health in Malawi. So this scarcity made it hard to find opportunities to practice wildlife medicine. So advice for aspiring wildlife professionals. So these are just a few advice that I have for people that want to become, like students that want to become wildlife vets. Seek exposure as well as diverse experiences. So actively seek opportunities that allow you to work with various species and ecosystems. You can do internship, you can do volunteer programs, um, also connect with experienced wildlife professionals to learn from others in the field as well. Secondly, cultivate your passion and stay focused. Your passion for wildlife will drive you to explore new ideas and innovations. So stay curious and engaged with latest research and developments in wildlife conservation as well as veterinary medicine. Also commit to continuous learning. Pursue formal education and training, like what you do in school, but also seek out informal learning opportunities such as online courses, webinars, and conservation lectures, like the lectures that Leadership in Conservation does and Share Screen Africa organize. The field of wildlife conservation is ever evolving. So stay open to new technologies, new techniques, and approaches that can enhance your skills. Also, gain hands-on experience by, of course, volunteering with organizations like the Long Wildlife Trust, where you can gain real-world experience while continuing contributing to meaningful conservation efforts. I just want to give a special shout out to Dr. Amanda, who is going to be the third speaker today. She was my wildlife medicine lecturer at Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. So she inspired my passion to become a wildlife vet, and she continues to be my role model up to date. Thank you all for your time and attention. I hope that my experiences have given you some insights into the important work we do in wildlife medicine and conservation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bridget, for the wonderful presentation. And from Bridget's presentation, we can see how much curiosity plays the role when you want to achieve something, and connecting with people who can help you achieve your dreams. That's very important as a student. And also, as Bridget was speaking, your last sentence just reminded me of how you and me discussed how Dr. Amanda taught with passion. Yeah, the first day, the first lecture that we had from Amanda, we saw passion in her eyes as she taught us. Yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Amanda, for that. And you can see your fruits now. With let me invite Dr. Amanda.
Hello.
Amanda, welcome, and you can now share your screen.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stella. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today a little bit about my experience as a wildlife vet. And I was a wildlife vet in Malawi for 10 years, but I also have practiced in Chad and in Southeast Asia. So I'll chat a little bit about that. Most of the wildlife work that I've done has been in rescue and rehabilitation, but also I wanted to talk a little bit about how veterinarians can be involved on an ecosystem level with management support and have some slightly different roles than traditional veterinary medicine, kind of what you would learn in school. Talk a little bit about private practice. And then also, yes, I have had the privilege of teaching both Stella and Bridget at the university, and I love teaching at the university. It's super fun. So the reason I've put my education up here is just because people ask, what is your education? What is your background? And so, of course, I've got the Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, but also I did a master's, and I looked at wildlife epidemiology, specifically anthrax and wood bison. And that has been a real stepping stone for me in advancing my career. And this is something that if you have any interest in research at all, I highly, highly recommend, because research will open doors for you, and especially in the wildlife field. And I wanted to also talk a little bit about my background, because I've been practicing for 20 years now, which seems like a long time, and it is. But when I started out, I didn't jump directly into wildlife. I actually did all exotics private practice with birds and snakes and reptiles, and it was back in the United States. And it was a really, really, really good entry to a lot of the animals that you would see in the wild. You find out that duiker are just as sensitive as bunny rabbits, and parrots and birds and raptors and things are pretty much the same, and all the reptiles are the same. So it's a really good foundation. And I worked with monkeys in a more like a research facility, but also worked in zoo. And I worked in zoo, I worked in shelter. I did trainings, residency, and internships. And then I really, really, really wanted to work in situ conservation. I thought that it was great being able to do the medicine and take care of people's pets or animals in zoos, but I actually really wanted to work in situ conservation. And so I went and worked for Yashe Conservation Trust in Belize and in Botswana and Namibia doing teaching, and I was on the ground. And so we were out there doing these conservation activities, interacting with community members, and I was like, this is really, really fun as well. And I must admit, at that time, I was looking for a way that I could be involved in conservation activities and also wildlife medicine. And that's where coming and working for the Lilongwe Wildlife Trust came into play. So back in 2013, that is when I started working for the Lilongwe Wildlife Trust. And I won't say too much about that because Bridget has done an excellent job with an intro to all of the things that they do rescue-wise. But back in 2013, they did not have a dedicated wildlife vet in country that could help animals out in the field that were victims of snares or gunshots or anything from human-wildlife conflict. And so the Department of National Parks and Wildlife and the Lilongwe Wildlife Trust said, do you want to come and be this veterinarian and work in the field with these animals? And so that is where I really got started as a field wildlife vet. And so you can see in the picture in the bottom left, that is a snare wound that's around an elephant's leg. And these snares can cause just horrific injuries. And if you don't have a vet to come and dart these animals and take these snares off, then it can sometimes lead to the death of these animals. And at a minimum, it just leads to years sometimes of suffering with those snares on there. And so that was really one of the reasons that I got started in Malawi, was to be able to tackle some of these threats with the snaring in the wildlife. And then as the position kind of changed a little bit, also the pangolins, if you may know, that they are the most heavily trafficked mammal species on the planet. And Malawi started receiving more and more and more pangolins coming through the illegal wildlife trade. And they were coming to the Lilongwe Wildlife Center. And so these were animals that we would have to treat sometimes in the field, and sometimes they would have to come back to the center. And Bridget knows very well how difficult it is to treat pangolins and to rehab them. But this, I think, one of the reasons that this is right here and so important is that up until 2016, I had never seen a pangolin, and I didn't know anything about pangolin medicine, didn't know anything about pangolin biology. They certainly didn't teach that in vet school. And so then suddenly you've got a new species and you need to know basically all about it so that you can take care of it. And I think that that is one of the fun parts of veterinary medicine, and especially about wildlife medicine, is because there's so many species out there. And while I was saying that there are some overlaps with pets, the parrots and the snake's a snake, and parrots are all very similar in the ways that you can medically treat them. Sometimes you've got these animals like pangolins, which are an entirely different thing. And from how they eat to how stressed they get to any of the medicines you can give them, then that is something brand new for a veterinarian to learn. And that's kind of scary, but also exciting at the same time. So back in 2022, I left the Lilongwe Wildlife Trust, and so I didn't get to overlap with Bridget, but I left the Lilongwe Wildlife Trust and I went to Chad. And I went on a different kind of adventure to be the head of restoration ecology for the greater Sakuma ecosystem. And so this is a position that I got partly because I was a veterinarian. But then again, this is part ecology. And so that was something that I had worked alongside ecology, but hadn't worked being in charge of ecology. But this is something that veterinarians can also be a part of in certain scenarios. And Chad is completely different from Malawi. They have very, very extreme seasons, from Sahara-like dry season to flooding like you wouldn't believe in the rainy season. It's a completely open ecosystem, no fences. There are a lot of herders, and especially migratory cattle herders that come in and around the park. So it was a completely different change of scene and very interesting. And so I was in charge of research and monitoring. These lions were so chill. They were the easiest lions to dart ever. And some of the research that we did in the GZE were camera traps, direct observations, keeping track of individual animals, especially when you're talking about lions and rhinos, aerial surveys, and collar and horn transmitters. And you kind of go, oof, how do veterinarians get involved in these sorts of things? So camera trapping, I've got this whole array of pictures. You can see some animals are very, very difficult to see unless you're lucky or unless you've got a camera trap out there. Aardvarks, honey badgers, even caracals can be really, really challenging to see. But one of the things that we found out with camera trapping is that you can actually get a pretty good understanding of an animal's like just some animals' general condition, body condition through camera trapping. You can see if there's animals that have injuries. You can see if animals have skin disease, if they've lost weight. And so camera trapping becomes not just a tool to monitor cryptic species, but also to be able to monitor some of the health of the animals. And so if you've got a bunch of bushbuck that have a whole bunch of manky skin, you kind of wonder, all right, cool, what's going on there? Do we need to intervene? And then, of course, one of the most fun things to do and most important things to do is to be putting collars on animals. And the satellite collars were very important, especially because you wanted to be able to know where these animals were at given points most of the time. So especially these lions, if they're traveling outside of the protected area, they run the risk of human-wildlife conflict. And so we were very, very specific on which lions we thought had the highest chance of having conflict, and we made sure that we put satellite collars on those. But we also wanted to see where other animals went, such as elephants, such as the migratory antelope. And so we fit quite a lot of collars on a number of different species. And each species has a different collar size and weight. And it's not just about, okay, so you need a certain length, so it goes around the neck, are more of an oval, whereas a lion might be more of a round shape. So it's really interesting how each collar is very specific for the animal. And this is just kind of an example. This also has Dr. Laston when we had collared an elephant there. So these are some of the animals that we have collared. And then, so this is not wildlife, but while I was in Zakuma, I got to be in charge of the stables. And that was for all of the horses that they used for patrols during the rainy season. So like I said, in the rainy season, there would be a lot of flooding. You can't drive, you can't ride a motorbike. If you want to do foot patrols, it's like hundreds of kilometers that you need to cover, and it is almost impossible to effectively do that. And so there's a huge history of horsemanship in Chad, and so it made a lot of sense to use horses. But if you can imagine, horses collect injuries and amazing diseases like you wouldn't believe. And some of the ones are similar in wildlife species, but I'll tell you that doing horses versus doing wildlife, when I do wildlife, all of the animals are sleeping because I anesthetize them. So if we put a collar on, or if we need to do treatment, then we dart them and they're sleeping. Horses aren't sleeping. So it was a completely different thing for me, because the horses let me know if, for example, I haven't blocked an area well enough. And it was just something different. It was very cool. I love them. But all of the different types of infectious diseases that you can imagine, we saw. So it was definitely a challenge, but it was very cool. And these are the sorts of things that, as a wildlife veterinarian, you might find yourself thrown into. Why? Because in the middle of Chad, in the middle of nowhere, there's just not that many other folks around who can do this, and it ends up being you. So after Chad, I went to Southeast Asia to work with Free the Bears, which is a rescue organization for sun bears and moon bears. And I went as a regional veterinary program manager just to kind of get some of the systems set up and provide a bit of mentorship there. I also met sun bears and moon bears and fell completely in love. They have sanctuaries in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And some of these bears are rescued from the bear biofarm. So similar to wildlife trade, there are still bears are being kept in captivity, and their gallbladder, the bile from the gallbladder, is being harvested even while they're alive and used in traditional medicine. Unfortunately, these bears tend to suffer quite a bit, and they're in very small cages. And so there's quite a few rescue organizations and rescues around these areas where they are able to take care of these bears and give them lifelong care. What's really, really cool is there are some amazing veterinarians working in all of these countries. And so my role was coming in and just helping. They can do all of the things, DART, do all the general preventative care and things like that. And so my role was just as more of a mentor and working through difficult cases, helping interpret x-rays. And I think that that's one of the things, is having good mentorship as not just as a student, but as a young veterinarian is really, really critical. And I will say this as a side note right here, that is why I'm where I am today as a veterinarian, is because I had just really excellent mentors. And not just when I was young, I still have a list of people in my phone that I call when I need help. And you never stop learning, and you never stop needing to ask somebody who knows more than you for advice. So then I came back in December of 2023 to Malawi to start Congo Wildlife Services with a colleague of mine. And we just wanted to provide some of the assistance for management activities. So the Longway Wildlife Trust does the rescues, like there's snares to be taken off and things like that. The Longway Wildlife Trust takes care of that, which is very cool. But then putting on collars or moving some animals around, things like that, then there was room for some private practice. And this is a photo of the first case that we did, which was changing the collars on 2 African wild dogs in Luande. So with my remaining minutes, I wanted to go through a couple of cases with you. And the reason I wanted to do this is because I wanted to demonstrate how hard sometimes it is to make clinical judgments in the field where there's limited access to things, and things that I learned, and then things that I'll never do again. And just to go through the process a little bit. So this is a horse that has a swelling from an anti-trypanosomiasis injection. This was huge. And if you have a swelling this big, then you run the risk of having compartment syndrome, which is where you're squishing your blood vessels and nerves and having damage that way. So we needed to open it. And this on the left was me opening it. I didn't have an ultrasound to see where that fluid pocket was. I was guessing. And because you're supposed to give them deep IM, then that fluid pocket was deep. And I had 2 liters of fluid at least poured out of that. And so we provided relief, but look at that wound. It was horrendous. And so if I was to do this again, I would put in a drain. We didn't even have any drains. I would have done something differently. But in this case, we ended up needing to manage this as almost as an open wound, because it kept filling up with fluid for the next 2 or 3 weeks. But slowly over 6 weeks, this healed. But we had to deal with this in Chad with minimal resources, and it was really, really tough. And if you see exactly where it is, it's hard to keep a horse from bending its neck there, hey? So that was a real challenge, and we were super glad when this horse healed. When I was in Cambodia at the Bear Center, they had a lot of dental calculus on these teeth. And if you see, it's causing the gingiva to be inflamed and also to regress. And so a lot of the standard practice was to just take these teeth out, was clean what you can, but once you start having a lot of gingival regression, you needed to take these teeth out. And so they would, and they're huge if you can see the picture on the side. But what you ended up getting was a large amount of bony like alveolar bone resorption in the jaw. And it was causing significant problems because it was making the jaw less stable. Because if you take out the tooth and that surrounding bone, then they were more at risk of jaw fractures. And so then you're with this catch-22. Do you do best practice and take these teeth out, or do you try to preserve these teeth as long as possible so that you can try to preserve the jaw integrity as long as possible? And so this is where sometimes the medicine isn't that clear. Root canals can help tremendously, but they don't help when you already have a lot of gingival, like they can help keep a broken tooth or something, but they don't help when you have your gingival recession already. So these are the sorts of things where it's not just one clear-cut answer. And then some adventures in the field, like when you dart an animal and how responsible you have to be and how in tune you have to be to what's happening and just to be on it. Because on the left is a picture of a tiang we darted in this huge open field, ran a kilometer directly into this mud. And then when we got there, the head was dipping down. And you don't want it to suck up mud, right? Because that's not good for anybody's lungs. And so I had to like basically jump out of the truck, run in, grab the head up. And then how do we get this, 150 kg antelope out of the water? You don't. So you put on the collar, you put on the collar and you wake him up in the mud and you kind of help him out of the mud. But these are the sorts of situations you end up in. And it's kind of similar to the picture on the right when I was in Luanda and we needed to take a snare off this water buck, true to form, water buck, run to water after darting, got him. So I, of course, had to run after him, grab him right before he fell asleep and put his face in the water, and then take the snare off and then have to just kind of sit with him until he is awake after you do the reversal and move him out of the water. And so these are the sorts of things that it's like you have to really be on your toes sometimes when you're working with wildlife. Other things. So you have this tiang that we darted, and he might have been acting a little funny. And it turns out he had been bitten on the butt by a lion the night before. Didn't die. They didn't kill him. Actually, we found the lion later, and she had gotten kicked in the eye by this tiang, and I think had given up because she was all squinty. But these are the sorts of things where you're like, wow, this is a natural process. What do we do with this? But we ended up collaring him and giving him antibiotics, and he ended up migrating normally. And so that was really cool, but very strange incidental finding. And then the last one was a case of this elephant that we were trying to put collars on. I did not see that this cow had a calf with it. There's a whole herd. So I darted this cow, and then when everybody moved off, then this calf stayed. I was not happy about that. No one was, and the calf was confused. And we said, okay, you're having to make these decisions at the right at this time. And so the animal is in sternal. You don't like that. You want the elephants to always be able to be in lateral. But if you see the way that her legs are splayed, there was no way we could roll her into lateral, even though we tried. Meanwhile, the baby's freaking out. So we're trying to make sure that it doesn't lose its mind and run away. And so at one point, the elephant's not breathing as well as I want. I'm just like, forget it. We're not collaring. We're not doing anything. We just need to reverse this animal and make sure it gets reunites with this baby, because that's the most important thing, is the successful outcome of life and mom and baby together, and forget collaring. And you know what? That's what we did, and that's what happened. And these are the sorts of decisions that you're having to make. Can you have a job that you need to do, is just put collars on these animals, but then you also have to evaluate each and every scenario, and make the best decisions. And it's not easy. It's not easy, but it is kind of fun. And that's it. And this is the picture of the moon bears, because they are now my third favorite carnivore. And they're just so friggin' cute. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Amanda. I really enjoyed going through everything, all those cases. Yeah, to see, it's very good to see successful stories like that. And thank you so much for sharing all those knowledges with us. Yeah, we really appreciate.
No problem.
So now we'll go into the question and answer section. If you have any question, please raise your virtual hand and you'll be given an opportunity to unmute yourself and ask the question. Yeah, as we wait, I'll start by reading the questions from the chat, but if I see a hand, then I'll go for the hand. Yeah, so the first question is for you, Dr. Eva. It's from Lloyd. He's asking, how does this bat transmit the virus to wildlife, animals, and human as well?
Good. Yeah. So the viruses are kind of transmitted to direct contact or sometimes indirect contact through something. So the virus is depending a little bit on virus where it's found, but it could be in the feces or in the saliva or in the blood. So kind of any sort of activity or any occurrences where those things could come into contact with other wildlife or with humans. So in the case of hunting and eating bats for food, that is an obvious one. So when there's a physical contact between a human and the bat, so that's when those kind of bodily liquids, so saliva, blood, feces, or urine, they can come into contact with you as a human, and that's how you get infected. With other wildlife, it could be through other wildlife eating the bats, or equally, if there's sort of dead bat somewhere, there could be a physical contact. Wildlife is also curious. We know that sometimes they just go snooping around. So these kind of things, we obviously don't have all the information of how some of these viruses how do they circulate in the ecosystem. But basically, it needs some kind of a quite close contact, either direct physical or through something. For example, these are fruit bats that I've been talking about. So it could be sharing a fruit that bat has been just eating, and it has the saliva in it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eva. So there is a hand from Rashid. Rashid, would you please unmute and ask your question?
Hi, do you hear me? So I want to say thanks for your time.
Yes, we can hear you.
It was an inspiring lecture. So my question was, it's known that Hendra virus is caused by fruit bats, and it is mainly found in Australia. Did you find through your research this virus in fruit bat in Africa?
Right. So thanks for the question. And so what we did is we did screen all the bats for paramyxovirus RNA, and Hendra is one of the paramyxoviruses. So the few bats that we found that had an actively a virus in them, we don't know yet which type of paramyxovirus those are. So that we're not quite sure. But then we looked at the antibodies, and some of these bats have definitely been in contact with a virus that is either Hendra or something similar to Hendra. So the antibodies were reacting to our Hendra antigen. Now that could and Henipavirus. So we got both Nipah and Hendra virus in our panel. So we're definitely having some bats there that have antibodies that are reacting to that virus, or that antigen that has been isolated from the Hendra virus. So
it's possible to go globally, because now it's just mainly in Australia, and some research say that it may expand to the Middle East and Africa and Asia, but till now there's no any sign of that. We in Jordan, we do some research, some of the doctors and the research in the bats here in Jordan, and they didn't found any sign or antibodies of Hendra virus, but it is possible to go globally, and the research says.
Yeah,
So,
so yes.
mhm,
Yeah, so I mean, for our data set, that is still quite early, and we would definitely have to confirm. We could, for example, look at neutralizing assays. So whether those are whether that could confirm that we are seeing Hendra, specifically Hendra virus antibodies, but something is definitely reacting there. So in the Henipavirus group. So there's kind of indications. It was a very small number of bats that did have those reactive antibodies. So I think this is an open question, but we definitely look more into this.
mhm. You have another question. So it is there's any way to reduce the rate of virus and disease transmitted from bats to animals or human?
A way to reduce the rate.
Yes.
Well, certainly limiting contact is the easiest way. I think after COVID, we are all also kind of on a personal level aware of what are the possibilities of how do we reduce transmission. So reducing contact, definitely looking into these potential high risk interfaces where this kind of close contact could happen and viruses could jump over. So into another species. So those are definitely the easiest way or the most kind of obvious way to start limiting. Obviously, then in some cases you could look into vaccines that are always a way of certainly limiting the harmful effects of transmission, but limiting contact and
Mhm.
understanding what those risk interfaces are.
Because there's a lot of bats, especially around my house, and they are eating all kind of fruits in our garden. So I just want to be sure that I'm gonna be safe, my family, the animals around, no? Because even the feces and the urine, they're just in the ground, and the bats all around the house. So if there's any way to reduce it, be safe, and you know.
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is a question that often does get asked because bats are getting a lot of time a little bit bad rep for having being associated with all these viruses. I think what we do need to remember that bats are incredibly widely spread. So bats are in a lot of our back gardens and front gardens, and they are kind of a lot of times near us. So what that kind of very close contact or interface is risky. That is kind of the question that we have to ask, I think. And when it comes to feces and fruit, for example, I mean, another important thing is to remember that those, for example, the bat feces, they don't stay infectious for terribly long time. I can't give you like a number for that, but viruses do not stay alive terribly long time in outside a living animal. So there are these kind of it doesn't mean that if they are in your close vicinity that they're necessarily dangerous to you. And I think we've got so many questions that we don't know yet and understand exactly of the risk of transmission. But one thing is certain, that bats are everywhere, and we definitely want them to keep being around us. They are important animals, and we definitely don't want to get rid of them. Put it that way.
Mhm.
So where is that risk? It's not always an easy thing to quantify.
Yes, for sure. Thank you for answering me, Dr. Eve. I have my last question. It's a general question. I'm still at my third year as a veterinary student, and I have some interest about wildlife animals. And I was just curious, how should I do or go with the wildlife medicine? Is there any contact, any specialty, any in a way to improve myself and work with the wildlife facilities.
Shall I? Well, actually, I'm still kind of online here. So I think Amanda, for example, had so many examples, and actually, and both two speakers had very good encouragement of just getting involved in things. So I think you might be in better place, answering that.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, for my part, seeking exposure really, and contacting whoever is around you that has those links, talking to people, getting in contact, and yeah, being curious.
Yep. And just to follow up, just if you know anybody in the area who is practicing wildlife medicine, then just give them a call. And I did that as well. Cold called people and said, can I come and work there? And then Bridget, where Bridget is at the Lolonga Wildlife Trust, they have externships for veterinary students. That's a really good way of getting your foot in the door. And it's just kind of digging around and finding any and every opportunity that you can. And I think also when you're a student, what's really fun is that you can explore a lot of different avenues. You can explore the research avenue, potentially do a research project with wildlife, or you can go with the rehab, or you can go with maybe the field capture. There's a lot of different avenues that you can explore as a student. So I would just say, look into them all.
Yeah, because I have been searching for some opportunities, and some of the facilities I found in wildlife, they asking or demands for uh, money, a large amount of money for us as a student, and to enroll in this kind of learn and lectures and wildlife, especially. So I was searching for something like for free, or if they want someone to work with them for free, but they're asking a lot of amount of money for a student, and yeah,
Um, I don't remember the name of the Facebook group, but there's a couple of Facebook groups. I know Wildlife Workers and Wildlife Science Network, and then there's veterinary volunteering. And there, because you're absolutely right that some places do charge quite a bit, and it can make it very difficult for veterinary students to go and actually get that kind of experience. But there are some places that don't, and they are some of these Facebook groups that are wildlife conservation, wildlife science, veterinary volunteering, they can help you with that, because people will pop in and be like, oh yeah, we take this folks seasonally here and here and here. So that is where I've seen actually the most of those types of opportunities. And then also contacting veterinarians individually. If you see somebody that you admire with like, say, for example, they've written a paper that you think is really cool, or something like that, then sometimes, and that was something that I benefited from as well as a vet student, is going and shadowing a private practitioner in that. And so
got it. I will look for it. Thank you again for your time and your information. It was so good and inspiring, and have a good evening.
cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rashid, for the questions. And thank you so much to our speakers for the good answers. And now I would like to ask Panache to unmute and ask her questions. Panache has several questions. Would you please unmute and ask?
Yeah, okay. All right. I think my first question is for Dr. Amanda. I would just like to ask, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, the first question was for Dr. Amanda. I just wanted to check with her from my experience with Africa Parks Network and other organizations similar to Africa Parks, if they are willing to share their data from their camera traps, maybe for epidemiological surveys. You know, for instance, we have several camera networks around Africa, but not much is done to actually look at the footage apart from maybe the specific species those other people or non-vets will be looking for within these parks.
So African Parks does actually collaborate with researchers very frequently. And so that's something that if you are aware of a particular area or park that you are interested in, then contacting them and saying, I'm interested in collaborating with you on something very specific, then yes, that has been known to happen in many parks that I've been associated with and seen. So yeah, you just have to get in touch and make sure that all of the procedures are followed and things like that.
No, I'm happy. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Amanda. And there is another question from our director, Johan. Johan, if you're here, please, would you unmute and ask your question?
Hi, good evening. First of all, thank you for the wonderful presentations. There's such a diversity. Just on behalf of some of the students, I was wondering, do you need to register with every country that you need to work in when you work in different parts of the world? Thank you.
So I can answer part of that. Yes. Yes, and just like in anywhere else, each country is their own entity when it comes to a veterinary department and ways of getting licensed. And so if you want to practice veterinary medicine in any country, then you need to follow their laws and make sure that you get registered with the vet department and doing whatever it takes to do that. So yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Amanda. And there is also another question for you, Dr. Amanda, from Sairusha. Sairusha, if you're still here, can you unmute and ask?
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for the interesting presentations. I'm a veterinary student in South Africa, and I was just really curious about why we prefer to have elephants in lateral recumbency as opposed to sternal recumbency, because usually sternal is standard practice when dealing with wildlife and large animals. Yeah.
Yes. So that's great. The great question. And it's because of basically their anatomy with their lungs and how they are attached to the sides of the wall. And so they cannot, they don't have the lateral chest expansion. They need to use their abdomen. And if they're lying on their abdomen in order to ventilate, then they won't be able to do it as effectively. So yeah, so when you're thinking about things like rhino, you're like, yes, keep them sternal. But then elephants, yes, it's really important to push them over on their side because of their anatomy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amanda. Okay, there is also a hand from Diswalo Mukari. Yeah. Would you please go for it?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I got this meeting link from one of my friends whose cousin who is in university currently. So I'm in high school. So all these exposures that you guys have been talking about that one may like expose themselves to learn more about veterinary medicine and all those types of fields. How can a high schooler expose themselves to these types of things? Because like as a university student, you have the resources to be involved in research programs or specific job opportunities. But as a high schooler, obviously those types of things are limited. But I would like to know, besides job shadowing, what else can an individual do?
That's a good one. And thank you so much for joining. Yeah, it's very interesting and makes me happy that we have someone from high school joining. Yeah. And now to our speakers, who would like to go first answering this question?
I I think that there are some programs that have summer and spring trips for high schoolers. If I'm correct, Loop Abroad might have some programs specifically for high school students. But that would be what I would be looking for is programs that are specifically designed to give you an exposure. And I will say that when I was in high school, I did a program that went to Costa Rica, for example, to learn a bit about tropical ecology. And I spent a couple of weeks there. And so these are the sorts of things that like it's not quite very independent, and it's with a group, but are usually very well structured, and especially for high school students who want to explore different types of careers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amanda. And on the same question, if Dr. Bridget or Dr. Eva wants to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking really from my own experience as well, just volunteering whatever opportunities you could find. I think to add to that, that's really it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eva. Dr. Bridget.
Yeah, as Dr. Amanda and Dr. Eva said, there are some organization also that welcome just anyone who is interested in animals, who is passionate about animals. You don't have to always like have a university degree or be in university. Like Little Wildlife Trust here in Malawi, we have a special veterinary exchange program, but we also have anyone can also go to. We just it's also we do rehabilitation as well. So anyone from high school or you're studying in university but you're not doing anything like animal related, you can also volunteer there. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I can see there is also another hand from Maret. Maret, can you go for it?
I just firstly want to say, how vet is it that one of our vets has a dog on her lap? Yay! Sorry, Amanda, Dr. Amanda, this is a question for you as well. How have you ever collared a rhino? And if so, how do you collar rhinos? Because I've heard that their necks are like it's not an easy task.
Yeah, so the traditional collars on rhino, they're not very successful. So there's a couple of different ways of being able to put transmitters in them. One way is putting a collar around their ankle, and that is somewhat effective, and it's mostly for like white rhino animals in sandy terrain, because also there can be a lot of mud that gets around those collars, and so they're my least favorite, but in certain parts a very utilized way of collaring. But then horn transmitters. So if you make a transmitter that is like VHF and you make it about the size of a matchbox, then you can drill a hole in the horn, put the antenna facing up, fill it with epoxy, and then it can work for sometimes up to 18 months, and you can find the rhino. And then also there have been quite a lot of iterations of ear tags. And so some of them have been the old cattle ear tag that's like might recognize that hang down. But then some of the newer ones are flat, and they just go on the back of the ear, and they are using solar to help power them, which I think is really cool. And so depending on the type of ear tag, you might be able to get GPS signals or a VHF. And so, yeah, the horn and the ear are a lot more useful then. Yeah. the neck.
That would probably, thank you. That would also then probably deter poachers from trying to
Do you
get
know
the horn because it's got something in it.
So sometimes they don't know. And here in Malawi, they have used a horn implant that, so a rhino was found poached and with the horns removed. And so they went up in a helicopter and with a VHF and they scanned around until they found it. And they found it in a deep freeze and were able to prosecute the people.
Oh, amazing.
It was crazy, but that was great.
Thank you so much. If we have no any question, then we'll end our session here. And I would like to thank our speakers. You were great speakers and we really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for making time to come and share your knowledge and your experience with the students. And also a special thanks to the students who joined us and other vets who joined from different areas. We really appreciate you. And next week, we'll have our last session in this series. And you're most welcome to join. I'd like to see you guys again. Yeah, and thank you so much. Have a good night.